So welcome, thank you very much for coming out. There's a question that I've been asking myself lately, which is basically, with the province on fire, why would we take this kind of nerdy side trip into electoral reform, and how does that help us achieve our larger goals? So there's sort of 5 things that I wanted to cover in the next 15 minutes with you. And basically, I think we need to establish what is in our control and what is not in our control before we can decide on the path forward. And the reality is that despite what it feels like right now, we're going to have a number of opportunities through grassroots political organizing to stop and further delay the Trans Mountain expansion. But to pull that off, we are going to have to be bigger and stronger than we are right now. And so pro-rep is the best chance that we see to get us there, and it has a bunch of added side benefits like completely changing the game on climate. So that's what I wanted to talk about tonight. So for me, I mean, there are literally hundreds of fires burning out of human control. We are unable to put out several hundred fires. We've lost 10,000 square kilometers of timber this summer. The impacts of climate change on our health, on our cities, on our weather are outside of our control right now, and that can be a really frightening and depressing thing. And a lot of things in the political realm are outside of our control, so what the Premier of Alberta does and says is not within our control in British Columbia. And we thought that because we had secured promises from Justin Trudeau that he would do what he said, and we thought that because bailing out a pipeline with public dollars is just such a boneheaded move that Bill Morneau would never be so stupid, we were wrong on all of those fronts. And so we've come to realize that at our current level of strength here in British Columbia, citizens actually do not have control over a great many decisions in the political realm. We're going to come back to these guys. But we also don't have control over how people react personally to these political decisions. We don't have control over the personal decisions that people make to put themselves in the path of arrest to try to stop construction. And we don't have control over how the police respond and the tactics that they use. And so this conflict is going to keep going, and we don't have control over that. And finally, we don't have control over the judiciary. We have an independent judiciary in Canada, and we don't have control over the outcome of court cases. Anybody know what's coming up on Thursday? Federal Court of Appeal is ruling on a massive consolidated case. 14 legal challenges. First Nations, municipalities, and NGOs have all had their case bundled together, and that decision is going to come out on Thursday morning. On the positive side, a win by any of our First Nations allies could delay or even kill the project, as in the case of Northern Gateway. On the negative side, the government learned from the Northern Gateway experience, and they're feeling very cocky about their legal case. We do know that regardless of what comes out of the decision on Thursday, key evidence was not considered by these judges as they evaluated the government's approval of Trans Mountain. And basically, we have emails now and even an interview with the Prime Minister that suggests the entire decision was made before they consulted with those First Nations, and that's not in keeping with the Canadian Constitution. So no matter what happens on Thursday, this is likely to end up in Supreme Court. Both sides are so dug in and the stakes are so high that whether it's the government that loses on Thursday, or it's the First Nations that lose, or some combination of the two, it's almost certain that this is going to continue, which means this is only a step along the way. And we don't control those timelines, and we're not lawyers, so we don't control the pleadings or the content of those arguments. What can we control? We own a pipeline now, and we control its financing as the Canadian people. And we've actually choked off financing to Trans Mountain once before. We scared the shareholders in Houston so much that they ran screaming. And that is why Trudeau now says he's going to build this pipeline with public money. But that bailout actually hinges on some pretty flimsy electoral math. And in fact, all of the opposition parties are opposed to using public dollars to pay for nationalizing a pipeline. So that includes not just the Greens and the New Democrats, but the Quebec parties and the Conservatives. And so if 14 votes change sides on this issue, the bailout dies. And we know that right now, 3 Liberal MPs have already broken ranks on this issue and voted against their party, 2 from Toronto and 1 from Kingston. So as we look at the next year, the Liberals only had 2 seats in BC before the last election. They gained 14 more. But if they lose 14 anywhere in the country, the bailout dies. And so that means they cross the floor, they vote against their party, they resign, they retire, or if they're defeated by any of the opposition parties in the next election, the majority required in the House to push forward with construction with public dollars will not be there. So we're going to come back to these guys. But I wanted to take a quick break for some ancient wisdom. You could basically pick any quote off of Google, and it would apply to our current situation. But I like these two. He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight. And I think this fall is not the time to try to force the hand of those Liberal MPs. I think we need to get stronger first, and the timing isn't right on that. And he said to attack your enemy where he's unprepared, appear where you're not expected. Hence the side trip into pro-rep. So here we are. The campaign is underway. There's a proponent, there's an opponent, and this is our last chance to win electoral reform in BC. There have been 2 referendums previously, both failed. I mean, you can quibble about the rules, but the reality is if this one fails, no government is going to bring this back to the people in a generation. So it's also our best chance to do 3 really important things, which is to tell a new story about our democracy, to recruit a big-ass army of volunteers, and again, to change the game on climate. And I'll explain why. I love a good David and Goliath story. This is a classic story of the established, entrenched political elite versus the rest of us. And so it's the career politicians and bureaucrats, it's the lobbyists and the CEOs, it's the entire political establishment that fought us on ban big money, that fought us on climate, and which in the process wrecked the BC housing market for their own personal gain. And these are the people who we are up against on the pro-rep campaign. Our Prime Minister has already picked a side. He picked a side when he lied about electoral reform, when he broke his promise on Trans Mountain. And so it's a chance to have a conversation about the failings of our entire political class. And we know that a win on pro-rep in BC is actually a major setback to Trudeau. And it's a gift to the rest of Canada to reopen the conversation around reform. So we are trying some new stuff in this campaign that I'm really excited about. We are going to reach out beyond our existing base of volunteers and supporters. And if we do our jobs and we connect the dots for these people, I think they're going to stick around and work with us in future elections and other contests that still lie around the corner. Most of all, we need to change the game on climate. I don't know if you're getting tired of this game, but I hate being told by politicians, don't push us on the issues that you actually care about because you're going to elect the bad guys. This idea that if you actually organize around the things that you really care about and you secure commitments from us and we shift our position to try and save the world, that we're going to elect a bunch of bad people with 23% of the vote. Don't push us on Site C and other massive taxpayer giveaways to the fossil fuel industry. Don't push us on fracking or methane emissions. Don't talk about how we fought the Squamish Nation in court to preserve Christy Clark's rigged Kinder Morgan approval. Don't talk to us about thermal coal or the fact that BC is now expanding exports of the dirtiest fuel on the planet. Don't talk about this stuff because you're going to elect the bad guys. I think that's a really stupid game. I'm getting really tired of it. I'm tired of strategic voting and being told to be afraid of the things that I don't want. And I think that we need leaders who are willing to work for the majority, for all of British Columbians, and not just for big banks and oil companies and that little sliver of the electoral base that they can whip up around immigration or whatever the issue is that they choose to fight on that election. So I'm really excited about the chance to dismantle this system in BC, to provide a template to other provinces to work from, and in the process to sharpen our skills and flex our democratic muscles and build an army that we're going to be able to bring back in the field next year. So yeah, the province is on fire. I think that unless you're a trained firefighter, the next best thing to trying to secure the future that we want for our kids and grandkids in BC is to get to work at this opportunity for systemic reform, and that's why Dogwood has decided to work on pro-rep. So thank you all for coming out tonight. I really appreciate you being here, and we'll be taking questions throughout the evening, as I'm sure there's some thoughts percolating for everyone. Okay, thanks. I'm going to hand it off to Lisa.